I'm really trying to think of examples of something stupider that I've seen in my life, in any capacity, in a personal capacity, in a political one, in this country or in any other. And I don't think I've ever seen anything this stupid in all my life. And it's not even, I mean, the policy itself is obviously, it's motivated by stupidity. I mean, the whole idea that it's a problem, that you want to buy someone's stuff, that's an act of humiliation, is deeply embarrassing. The methodology that he's used isn't even infantile. It's below the capacity of a child. It is below the level of rational thought.
It's now time for our political panel, where we sort of bring together two brilliant journalists to sort of, chew through the big politics. And my goodness, there's so much politics to crunch through today, from Westminster to Washington, mainly because yet again we're talking about Donald Trump, because it's been tariff week. Delighted to be joined by two excellent people, the iPaper columnist and broadcaster and author Ian Dunt. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
And Henry Hill, who's deputy editor of Conservative Home. Hello, Henry.
Hello.
That was a very low hen. Hello, Henry. That was a very quiet Henry. So that's very man of mystery.
Sorry, I have to try and liven it up.
Right, let's start with now, Ian. Tariff week. What do you think?
Well, it's going terribly well, obviously. I don't think I'm really trying to think of examples of something stupider that I've seen in my life, in any capacity, in a personal capacity, in a political one, in this country or in any other. And I don't think I've ever seen anything this stupid in all my life. And it's not even, I mean, the policy itself is obviously, it's motivated by stupidity. I mean, the whole idea that it's a problem, that you want to buy someone's stuff, that's an act of humiliation, is deeply embarrassing. The methodology that he's used isn't even infantile. It's below the capacity of a child. It is below the level of rational thought. And the impact that it's going to have on all of us, but especially, the thing that gets me is in people in Southeast Asia, decades of poverty reduction through trade. And now, these countries that got bombed by America. We might remember what America did to them in the 60s. And now being told, oh, you've raped us. You've raped the country of America because you provided products that we wanted to buy. So we're going to throw you back into poverty. So yeah, putting it all together, I'd say that I do not consider this a very successful or impressive policy program that he's unveiled.
And I mean, Henry, it's sort of, I've just, my introduction to the top of the show, it's just 7 weeks to the day when we had the Munich Security Council, and we were all kind of reeling about the geopolitical military implications of that very long conversation between Trump and Putin, and then J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference. And now, you've had the kind of world's military, orthodoxy and post-war consensus completely ripped up. Now you've got the sort of trade rules ripped up. It's kind of mind-blowing how much has changed in a very short period of time.
Yeah, history's back. Isn't it exciting? Doesn't everyone love living in the bits of the very long and chunky sections of the future's history books? I think the thing to remember that's about the United States is that for a very long time, it was isolationist. And I think because it got involved in World War One and then obviously in World War Two, and after World War Two basically was the top of the Western order, and then after the end of the Cold War, the global order, we sort of forget that there was a very, very deep strain of the rest of the world is on the other side of two very big oceans. We don't really need to worry about it. And it actually took an awful lot of work by the American presidents in both cases to get them into the war. And what we're seeing is a reversion to that kind of historical norm. Now, it was one thing when Trump was talking about security guarantees, but if you absolutely want to make sure that even if the Democrats win in 4 years, there's no chance of them just re-entangling America with all of these tedious commitments that are involved in global leadership. The one thing you can definitely do is force everybody to completely reorient their trade away from you, right? So it's absolutely extraordinary. I don't necessarily think that's the 4D chess game that Donald Trump is playing, but that will probably be the effect. And I think it's remarkable because once again, he's taken something where there was a legitimate case in some cases, and he's completely discredited it. On NATO, I think there were a lot of people, even in Europe, who would have sympathized with his criticism that we weren't spending enough. There is an argument for using tariffs and onshoring for strategically critical industries in an increasingly dangerous world, steel making, certain types of sensitive electronics and so on. But he's not done that. He's just done a blanket tariff on everything. And in the same way, he's handing Ukraine, or seems to be teeing up to hand Ukraine over to Russia. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's also extraordinary that one of the countries that wasn't on the kind of game show board was, of course, Russia. And I'm sure this is all linked to what's happening there as well. Well, look, let's now kind of move our conversation on to what should and can Keir Starmer do. Earlier in the show, I spoke with the former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, and he warned against a knee-jerk reaction from Keir Starmer. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I really hope that he is not thinking in any way of retaliating, because, let's be clear, goods exports from the UK to the US, the things that are going to be affected by these 10% tariffs, they account for about 0.3% of US GDP. So, any retaliation from the UK is not going to make Donald Trump sweat. But what it will do is be really damaging for our economy.
Ian, how does Keir Starmer play this now?
He's doing what he can. I don't think you can fault him for the approach. I've noticed lots of people who I'm usually quite politically sympathetic towards are getting to a space where they're saying, you just can't have any kind of deal with the Americans. This is not someone you should be doing deals with. And I do get where that's coming from. But if you're in Keir Starmer's position, every percentage point on a tariff is jobs. Your responsibility is to the people of this country, to the workers of this country. So you've got to work for it, and that's what he's doing. Here's the thing. We're not quite clear at the moment whether the US ask in negotiations is just about basically tariff rate quotas, like how much chicken and beef can we send to you, or whether it's about, I beg your pardon, of agricultural products can we send to you, or whether it's about actually the regulatory standards, the classical thing that we talked about like ad nauseum through Brexit of hormone-injected beef and chlorine-washed chicken. I really resent the fact that, having lost years of my life, like literally years of my life, talking about chlorinated chicken during Brexit, I've somehow been sucked back to the past. I have to talk about it all over again. But nevertheless, if Starmer was to accept that idea, he's in real trouble, and he knows it. He knows that you can't get that past the British public. Like the wave of outrage that would come from that really very vivid visual example, even though in many cases it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, would just be too politically damaging to him. So the truth is that's where Keir Starmer gets stuck. If it's true that America is going to demand stuff on chlorine-soaked chicken, then that deal isn't going to happen, and then we have to see what proceeds from that. If they're not going to demand that, then he can do that deal and also go do a deal with the Europeans, and everybody's, well, not smiling, but at least not in a state of absolute existential despair.
I love the fact that a vast amount of your life has been taken up with chlorinated chicken. You'll be on your deathbed, and chlorinated chicken will be one of your big memories of your time on this earth.
That's a very depressing thought.
I know. Well, brace yourself. Henry, what should the political strategy be? Jeremy Hunt was interesting because he was saying, be cool, be calm, don't do a knee-jerk reaction. It doesn't look like Keir Starmer's going to do that. To be fair, he's consulting with lots of businesses. All the businesses so far, we spoke with our political editor, Steve Swinford, who said all the businesses he's been speaking to have said they're sending a really clear message to Downing Street not to do any retaliation now. But does a point come where he has to do something?
This is one of the great dilemmas of dealing with Trump. And it's made more acute by tariffs, but we've seen it a lot over Ukraine, when there's lots of people who will say, we need to stand up to bullies, we need to stand up to Trump, and completely understandable as that reflex is, you do have to deal with the fact that he is president of the most powerful country on earth, and his decisions have more say over, say, the future of Ukraine and the direction of Europe than maybe any other single human being. So you do need to treat him with care, if not necessarily with respect. On tariffs, I think my default position is that probably the Singapore government's response was the correct one. It literally just put out a statement saying, we're not going to do this because it would raise the cost of our imports. End of story. That's the baseline position, because if the government engages in a retaliatory tariff regime, what it's choosing to do, as you said, is push up the cost of anything that we import from the United States. That's going to mean more on the cost of living crisis. It's going to hurt. It's going to cause job losses and so on. So the only reason that you would embark on that course, that very painful course, is if you think that doing so unlocks enough leverage for you to get a better deal out of the United States. Because there is a logic, depending on what the US wants, as Ian said, depending on what the US actually wants, there is a logic that, well, why would they reduce their barriers to our exports if we don't have any barriers to their exports to drop? But that depends a lot on your reading of the Americans, your reading of the relative clout of Britain and the United States in that negotiation, and of course, as Ian was saying, whether you can actually get that deal over the line anyway. So my default position would just be ride it out. It's obviously bad news for the economy, but reciprocal tariffs is worse.
It's interesting you mentioned Singapore, because Jeremy Hunt actually has written an article today for the Telegraph saying that we should pivot towards Singapore. He said not in terms of getting rid of the welfare state, but in terms of as America is erecting trade tariffs, we should bring them down, and actually we should become a real bastion of free trade, which is what we have been historically since the repeal of the Corn Laws. That's his big argument. Welcome back to our Friday political panel. We have got the columnist and broadcaster Ian Dunt, and we have Henry Hill from Conservative Home. Marcus just messages in saying, why is the complete lawlessness of Trump's tariffs not a matter of our discussion in the UK? We need forceful countermeasures now to remind the US of international law, that international law counts. I suppose the difficulty is, Ian, here, you do have international law and there are, mechanisms for trade disputes, but Trump is just riding roughshod all over them.
In his first term, it was the appellate court in the WTO. That was a functioning body. It was slow. It was collegiate. It's not the same as like looking at the Strasbourg court or something, but it was a functioning body. He's breaking trade law all over the place. This is all, he's discriminating in his tariffs. He's launching them without any viable argument for why you might need them. Your caller is entirely right. He's breaking international law. The thing is, in his first term, he basically just withheld support for judges in the appellate court. The body died. Joe Biden, to his considerable discredit, did nothing to bring it back while he was president. So now that Donald Trump comes back, it's like, well, because of the work that he did years ago, he already destroyed all of the enforcement mechanisms that would have prevented him from doing this in the first place.
And he's just published a flurry of posts on Truth Social, his latest one hitting back at China's move to slap tariffs back on the US. He says China played it wrong. They panicked. He said the one thing they cannot afford to do is a reminder. China said it would retaliate with an additional 34% tax on US goods from next week. Henry, one of our listeners has messaged in saying that now that China has slapped these retaliatory tariffs on, does that mean Trump's going to redo his calculation and up the tariff back against China?
Well, that's the logic of his position. And that's one of the problems if this whole thing wasn't just basically a list of problems that have been put together into a policy. But one of the problems with this is, right, what do you do? What do you do when somebody actually, and China is quite a different country to us in terms of its economic place in the world and the amount of, for example, US government debt that it holds. If China decides, all right, we're going to step up and raise tariffs, you are stuck in this doom loop where either he now has to go run his calculation again and hike the tariffs up, or he has to back down and be seen to lose face to China, which is, from his own sort of worldview, probably the worst possible outcome he could get out of these in immediate political terms. So it's going to be extremely difficult, and it is remarkable because about what the previous speaker said. International law, we call it that, but it doesn't function like national law. You can't send for the police. You can sort of pretend that's how it works when you're one of the really powerful countries running it, right? Functionally, when we appealed to international law, for example, in Kosovo, what that really meant was that NATO, i.e. mostly America, went in, right? When the really big countries that underpin it decide to stop playing ball, there really is nobody to whom you can appeal. What's surprising, not really from Trump's perspective, but from a broad perspective, is that being the hegemon, being the one that set the rules, being the one that appointed the judges at the WTO, was hugely to America's advantage, right? It had baked in a lead in a lot of these systems, international systems that we had since World War II. And Donald Trump is throwing them away.
Yep, absolutely. Howard messaging going, wow, peak snobbery and Trump derangement syndrome, Howard. Well, I don't know if you'd say the markets have got peak Trump derangement syndrome when, $2 trillion US dollars have been wiped off the stock exchange, and people are really, really worried about what's going to happen in America and, of course, around the world. Right, in the remaining few minutes we've got left, I'm going to put one question to each of you about domestic politics. So brief answers, if you will, gentlemen. Ian, 5 years today, Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party. How would you assess his journey since then?
Oh, God. And a short answer.
Well, you got a minute or so.
Okay, I'll take it.
Got 2 minutes.
I mean, look, he's a profoundly impressive politician in a way that almost no one recognises, by virtue of taking Labour from an existential drubbing to a historic majority, just on the maths, just the pure maths of the man electorally. And obviously he's not solely responsible for that. He's a tremendously impressive politician. And I thought that his message when he came to power of we will disprove and we will refute populism by showing competence and calmness was very effective. I'm not convinced after the months of power that he's demonstrating that message through the way the government works. It seems to really lack a sense of core value in which it pursues events. It seems to flip a bit with what's being discussed on a day-to-day basis. It seems at some moments, some quite disturbing moments, to be actually quite starstruck by what's going on in the Donald Trump administration, rather than just trying to manage the situation. So the full report, obviously, we're not going to know for some time, but there are really worrying signs. However, none of those take away from the fact, the little recognised fact, that he really has, in electoral terms, done things that almost no one that you can think of has managed to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I remember very well, vividly, when he won. In full disclosure, I was very much supportive of him becoming leader of the Labour Party. But I remember saying to his supporters, I mean, this is amazing, but there's no way you're going to win the next general election. I mean, this is about, kind of moving Labour from being, flatlining to getting a bit of some signs of life back. It's going to be a very long journey back into government. So that in itself is extraordinary. Now, Henry, your question is, of course, about the Conservative Party. Esther McVeigh has said that Kemi Badenoch should just let Runcorn be won by reform. She says that sign of goodwill could help build an electoral pact with Nigel Farage. What do you think about this?
It actually, right, it might make sense right at the election for there to be an informal pact between the Tories and Reform where they deprioritise certain areas, but it is absolutely not in their interests in this Parliament to have a formal pact, because both of them are trying to take votes from Labour, or if you're the Tories, also potentially the Liberal Democrats, and fend off, if you're the Tories, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. Whereas Reform are trying to attack Labour in seats where the Tories are third. So actually, in order to maximise each of their votes and reduce the risk to each of them, they want to be different, right? Reform shouldn't want to be openly in cahoots with the Conservatives that got chucked out of power only a few years ago. The Conservatives should not want to be seen as a Farage proxy in the bits of the country that still vote for them or might vote for them, which are otherwise potentially flirting with the Greens or the Liberal Democrats, or sort of leafy areas that went Labour as a one-off, right? The next Parliament, once we know the lie of the land about how the two parties do, is when there might have to be serious thought given to what the ongoing relationship between the two parties is, in order to get a right-wing government at some point in the future. But in this Parliament, they want to be developing as distinct brands as they possibly can.
And I presume as well, Henry, from Nigel Farage's point of view, if you are, and obviously this is his sort of projection, he's the insurgent, he doesn't want to be part of the establishment. If he looks like he's trying to do a stitch up with the Tories, that's bad for that message, right?
Well, yeah, no, exactly, right. He is, all but 9 of the seats where Reform are in second place are Labour facing, Most of them are up in what we now very hazily term the red wall. There's some psephologists who'll absolutely skin me for saying that, I'm sure.
Okay.
Why on earth would you want to be aligned with the Conservatives? It doesn't help you.
Okay. Well, look, what a fantastic chat that was. My huge thanks to Ian Dunt and to Henry Hill. That was absolutely brilliant. That's it for me. Thanks so much for your company this afternoon. Brilliant messages coming in. I've so enjoyed the chats that I've had with you. Thanks to my production team, Musty, Jake, Hannah, Georgie and tech operator Ryan. I'll be back here tomorrow and I'll be talking to Michael Heseltine about his thoughts on the